Hello and welcome to the MAPS Canada webinar series. My name is Shannon Smedella and I'm your host for the series. We are extremely excited to have you join us for our 12th episode of our webinar series. Since the beginning of June and continuing for one more week, we've had and will have an amazing selection of speakers, luminaries, scientists, doctors, and visionaries lined up just for you. We've gathered some of the best in the field to share important information and their take on the psychedelic renaissance. We are in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance with research projects and decriminalization proposals popping up across North America. And with MDMA on the verge of approval as a treatment for PTSD, psychedelic therapy is on track to become the next major breakthrough in mental health care. MAPS Canada, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, has supported studies to develop psychedelics into safe and legal medical treatment since its formation in 2008. Currently, MAPS Canada is funding two separate studies on MDMA and cognitive processing therapy as a treatment for PTSD. Additionally, plans to fund studies that identify psychedelic treatments for eating disorders and others that involve Ibogaine are in the works. To conduct and publish scientific research and education supporting the beneficial use of psychedelic medicines, MAPS Canada relies on public donations and fundraising initiatives. The funds raised from this webinar series will go to fund that research. So thank you so much for joining. The webinar series is in a final push of our $250,000 fundraiser campaign, and we're currently $12,000 away from our goal. We hope to have this goal achieved by the end of our series on August 25th, which is one more week. And we really need your help. So ways that you can help are, number one, donate. So there'll be a button at the end of the podcast that you can click. Number two, share the fundraiser campaign. We'll also provide a link for that. And number three, share the webinar series, as there's one more week left, but you can still purchase the series and watch all of the episodes. For more information on MAPS Canada, please see the website at www.mapscanada.org. Just a few updates before we begin. The episode that was rescheduled with Kabluti is rescheduled for August 19th, Wednesday at 3 p.m. PST, which is tomorrow. And we just spoke with him today in Brazil, and he's excited to share his wisdom on peyote. So that'll be tomorrow at 3 p.m. PST. Second, we would also love to know how we are doing. So there will be a testimonial form placed in the chat box for each submission today. We will be drawing a winner. We'll put them all together and draw a winner, and the winner is going to get free tickets to our next webinar series. So follow the link, fill out the form for a testimonial, let us know how we're doing, and you have until 4:15 p.m. to get it in for today's draw. So a few housekeeping items. Number one, we will start with our talk from our guest, Dr. Bia Labate, who is with us today. And after that, we will start our Q&A session. Make sure and vote up your questions because we will be prioritizing those. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Bia Labate. Dr. Bia Labate is a queer Brazilian anthropologist. She has a PhD in social anthropology from the State University of Campinas, Brazil. Her main areas of interest are the study of plant medicines, drug policy, shamanism, ritual, and religion. She is executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. She is also public education and culture specialist at MAPS, an adjunct faculty at the East-West Psychology program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She is author, co-author, and co-editor of 21 books, 2 special edition journals, and several peer-reviewed articles. So today, we're going to be talking about dilemmas of ayahuasca globalization in the 21st century. The use of the psychedelic plant brew ayahuasca has expanded significantly during the last 50 years. Once only known to Amazonian communities, ayahuasca is now used in diverse social and cultural contexts across the world. The Brazilian ayahuasca regions, originating with the Santo Daime in Brazil, founded in the 1930s, are now internationally recognized and established. An ayahuasca industry servicing Western clientele in search of shamanic healing is booming in the Amazon. A plethora of informal ayahuasca circles, ceremonies, and communities have also arisen, catering to a huge variety of social groups and needs. So Dr. Bia Labate will be talking about this with us today. Without any further ado, help me welcome Dr. Bia Labate. Hello, Bia. How are you today?
Hi, do you hear me?
We do, and we can see you as well, at least on my end. We have people tuning in from all over here. We have Santa Cruz, we have Montreal, Calgary, Canada, Virgin Islands, we have Toronto, Brazil. Make sure and let us know in the chat where you guys are tuning in from, just so we can see. And we have your slide up there. Perfect. Are you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Sounds great. I'm going to turn the screen over to you, and then we'll come back after for a Q&A.
All right. Okay, everybody. Nice to be here in this virtual space in this challenging times of global pandemic and COVID and social isolation and, communities spread apart. I hope everybody's keeping safe and healthy and that you're coping well with the quarantine. And for all of those who had losses, I send my deep condolences. I just want to also honor the memory of Jordi Riba, who just passed away last Friday. Jordi was one of the greatest biomedical researchers ever on ayahuasca, and his work was highly influential. He was the first guy to bring ayahuasca to the lab, and his work clearly influenced all the main relevant biomedical research ever. He was from Catalan, and he also flew planes and drove boats. A really lovely person, and the ayahuasca research community is mourning his loss. I send my solidarity to the family. And I want to thank MAPS Canada. I am a friend of Mark Hayden for over a decade and have been many times to both Vancouver and Victoria. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to do a more kind of dry presentation about ayahuasca, so I hope that doesn't put some of you guys down. Let me just start by saying a disclaimer that I have been drinking ayahuasca for 23 years, and I consider myself a follower of this spiritual path, and I have received a lot of beautiful blessings and teachings and inspiration and love and comfort, and also some harsh lessons and some good teachings of this beloved plant medicine, this spirit plant medicine. And I think, the presentation that I'm going to give here, it talks about kind of dry things and more boring things, more sociological things. I hope you can understand that I'm also an anthropologist trying to do social science and academic writing about ayahuasca. So with that, I'm going to delve into my presentation, which is a combination of my work, my 2-decade work studying ayahuasca, with also the work that we're doing in our recent founded institute, the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. So I just want to start by giving a little space to cherish and honor Chacruna. And, it's one of the plants that compose ayahuasca. So coming from this bush, the Psychotria viridis, I put it on purpose, a piece from California, because I just also think that plants, grow on different locations. And I have a bit of a hard time with this attempt to negate that plants or cultures can travel and mix. Although there are some really relevant questions around all of this, as we will see. But there you go. The service we do has to do with Chacruna, with the plants. We honor and protect sacred plants. We are in service of the plants. The plants have taught us. The plants have inspired us. The plants have made us dream and think of better worlds and other utopias. And that's why we named the title of our nonprofit is Chacruna. So our mission is to provide public education and cultural understanding about psychedelic plant medicines, and to promote a bridge between ceremonial use of sacred plants and psychedelic science. I guess a lot of people say they do this bridge, but I think, it's a kind of cliche to say, let's bridge the tradition, wisdom with science, but are people really doing that bridge? I am happy and proud to say that I think we are. We come from real ayahuasca communities, from South America, from non-English speaking world, from 2 decades of field work, and this is not just me, but a lot of us in Chacruna. And we have been trying to do this interface between social sciences and psychedelic science, and making academic knowledge more accessible. So instead of publishing very dense, long articles that are hard to understand, get out shorter articles in a more accessible knowledge for free entirely, and therefore making knowledge about scientific knowledge more accessible. And another big motto or goal of us in Chacruna is to promote equity, access, inclusion, and diversity in the field of psychedelic science. So we have a strong line of work related to this. I'm not going to speak so much about this now, but it's at the core of what we do as well. I'm going to show you guys a little, quick just images about the books, because I'm going to do a kind of summary of some of the main issues that we have been discussing in social sciences. So both my master and my PhD were about ayahuasca. I'm just quoting here the PhD. Ayahuasca mamancuna merci beaucoup. Diversification and internationalization of Peruvian ayahuasca vegetalism. This was published in 2011 by Unicamp. It's a university in Campinas, Brazil. And then we published a few books talking about the internationalization of ayahuasca. This came out in Germany in 2011. We also published, this is perhaps our most prestigious book, from Oxford University Press. It's a really amazing book. I highly recommend it. Ayahuasca Shamanism in the Amazon and Beyond. It's accessible. It's not, expensive. It's on Amazon. It's easy to get. The cover there is it's the illustration is the snake that, according to a lot of Pano groups, Pano mythology. Pano is a linguistic branch of, I don't know the word in English, sorry, of Pano-speaking groups, think that ayahuasca was a brew that was given to man by snakes. So that's a cover by Clancy Kavner, who's my co-editor in a lot of these books. And then there's this series of Routledge, which is also a very prestigious publisher, both in the UK and the US. The first one was The World Ayahuasca Diaspora, Reinventions and Controversies. It came out in 2017. And as a follow-up, we had The Expanding World Ayahuasca Diaspora, Appropriation, Integration, and Legislation. And we're working, that's a 2018. I mean, I selected here the books that have more to do with the topic of this presentation. But as Shannon said, I have published 21 books, and we're currently working on a new book about ayahuasca healing and science. So I also encourage you to visit our website and learn more about our research. This is something that Chacruna is also proud of, to be in the forefront of academic research. So what are some of the main issues with what we're calling the dilemmas of globalization? And here, also bear with me, because I'm kind of giving a big overview about the main topics that have worried academics and also communities in the last decades as ayahuasca goes global, because the genie is really out of the bottle. It's all over. It's all kinds of celebrities, all kinds of new documentaries, all kinds of new academic research, new websites, new expert services, new retreats. Ayahuasca exploded. So we used the term originally internationalization, others preferred globalization. Then we adopted the word diaspora, that comes from Jewish studies and other religious scholar references. I'm not going to get into this kind of discussion here. For simplification, I'm calling it globalization. So what are some of the main issues? One has to do with the sustainability. So as ayahuasca spreads, there has been more and more shortage, especially of the vine, which is harder to grow. It's not listed in international conventions, but from anecdotal evidence, there's areas like near Iquitos, which it's kind of devastated, and people have to go more and more into the inside the jungle. And legal issues is another big problem because ayahuasca has DMT, and although the INCB, a branch of the UN, doesn't recognize ayahuasca as a preparation of DMT, like doesn't make an equivalence between ayahuasca and DMT, a lot of national states do consider ayahuasca scheduled, and because it has DMT. So there has been arrests and problems. There has been also health concerns and worries about interaction with substances. A lot of discussions around practitioners' ethics and training, how people are claiming to become shamans and who did they learn from and who verifies this process. There's also a recent research actually by some colleagues of mine studying some ayahuasca brews that were circulating in Europe and found weird mixtures inside it, such as antidepressants. And so, there's been reports of things happening on the field. I still think that the problems are much less than the benefits on a general scope. Again, this is a very reductionistic approach, talking about, let's say, the shadow or what goes wrong. But in general, I still think that, ayahuasca has benefited a great amount of people and brought a lot of healing and spiritual teachings. I'm giving an overview of the discussions that happen in our field. Continuing to that, a lot of economic disparities, such as the emergence of new retreat centers that are run by foreigners, and locals frequently are like, the maids or chauffeurs. The shamans are like the help of the center and not fully empowered often. And this just has a lot of impacts on local communities. We also have a lot of reports about sexual abuse or problems related to a patriarchal Amazonian traditional culture, authoritarianism. And related to this, there's a lot of discussions about gender issues. And like, for example, in some of the Brazilian ayahuasca religions, there's a lot of stereotypification of gender roles that sometimes, are more strict even than in just like regular cities of places like Brazil, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro. Among the indigenous people, there has been a kind of invisibilization of women shamans, although some retreat centers really try to change this. A big problem that is related to this expansion has to do with what some colleague of ours, Aliena Caicedo, in one of our books writes as erosion of traditional legitimacy mechanisms. As traditionally the shamans were related to one community and had like clear methods by which the shaman could, be recognized or respected or acknowledged. And now some of these mechanisms are broken because there's a lot of itinerant shamans and also a lot of other references that play a role in the systems, like combination with all kinds of therapies and forms of urban religiosities. So these are sometimes systems that are in move. And then there is a whole discussion about the age of ayahuasca, and a lot of academics have criticized this reified version that ayahuasca has been used for thousands and thousands of years. And we published a little bit about about this topic in Chacruna. There's a lot of discussions on the origin of ayahuasca. And, sometimes there is this narrative that we name it as quite an evolution, that you had a traditional use by a shaman, and then a mestizo use by, riverine peoples on little towns, and then an urban use by like Christian religions, and then let's say the expansion to San Francisco or, Canada or big cities in South America. But the story and the book Ayahuasca Shamanism in the Amazon and Beyond shows this a lot, that the story is more complex. There is a lot of back and forth, especially in regards to vegetalismo, which is the modality that have expanded the most and kind of the majority of people know better. That, in fact, some of these practices emerged in a kind of already colonial context, influenced by missionaries in small riverine towns. And practiced as forms of therapies that they were then exported back to the forest and adopted by indigenous shamans. So sometimes we look at this indigenous use and we say, well, that's the original traditional use. But there has been a lot of mix, a lot of hybridization of back and forth. And so in the literature of ayahuasca, there has been a lot of emphasis on this idea of reinvention, hybridization, and it's not so strong, at least in the literature that I know of, this claim of cultural appropriation. This is also related to the fact that there are multiple original sources of ayahuasca. So what would you be appropriating yourself of if there's multiple shamanic uses and mestizo uses? There's also an interesting phenomena that some have called ethnic revivals, which is some groups that are not identified as indigenous and reclaim some kind of indigeneity through using ayahuasca, sort of reconstruct their own traditions and their own myths, and even the paraphernalia, the ritual paraphernalia, starts using feathers and singing songs that they learned with neighboring groups, and say that they are rescuing the original traditional their ayahuasca roots. This both in territories where you had traditional use that disappeared, and in places like in the south of Brazil, for example, with Guarani Indians that didn't have any kind of previous use of ayahuasca. That's not actually called ethnic revival, but what I'm saying is that there is a multiplicity of uses, and this search for authenticity sometimes is very Western and very this need to identify the original, the more pristine, the more pure, the more orthodox version is contrasted to this kind of mix that exists in some contexts. And also related to this is the process of what some anthropologists have called retraditionalization, which is like a kind of creating a hyper realism, creating rituals that are more ritualistic than the traditional rituals, or ritualizing areas of ayahuasca use that were not rituals before. For example, the cooking ayahuasca. And so there's also a lot of discussion about this orthodoxy. For example, in the Santo Daime branch, there's some people in the US that have adopted hymns, but started to sing them in English and don't sing in Portuguese, and think that makes no sense to sing in Portuguese because they don't understand, versus others that say that this is a true sacrilege. And some people, even in indigenous group, have added different musical instruments or in the untraditional rituals, and this also generates endless controversies. And now I want to move, I discussed a bit the anthropology, the cultural, the tradition, the tensions around the cultural issues. I want to talk a little bit about the work of Chacruna related to the legal dimension. This is a document that we published in 2012, where a bunch of us academics made a kind of defense for the right of using ayahuasca, the ritual and religious use. And we parallel it with the exemption for the use of peyote under the argument of religious freedom. And so this is a very foundational piece, and it inspires our work up to today. We have been discussing a lot the ayahuasca legality in the US. There's some interesting developments in Canada, where one of the branches, the Céu de Montréal, got the right to use ayahuasca, and then a few other branches of Santo Daime follow that right. So it's increasing, but it's not a widespread. So a similar situation exists here, where you have the Santo Daime and the UDV have a religious right. The Santo Daime only in some states, and the UDV throughout the US have these religious exemptions, and other groups have tried to follow it. So we have created this document. I recommend you Google this and you look in our site, 7 best practices for ayahuasca legal harm reduction. This is a little bit inspired on the agreements that both the Daime and the UDV did with the DEA on protocols to follow, to be considered religious and to be considered health and safety and non-diversion. So what are some of the practices that you can put in place for your ayahuasca communities to have less challenges if the situation comes that there is some kind of arrest or bust or anything? We have been discussing a little bit. My site, I recommend my site, is the biggest, library on ayahuasca legal cases. So just to remind, and it's a very dense discussion. Again, I'm throwing a lot of really dense information. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act provides no definition for religion. So courts have been left to develop their own criteria. And what happens in a lot of cases is that the courts will quote this classic case, which was the United States versus Myers from 1995. And what is ironic about this situation is a kind of circular thing. Like, we don't have a definition of religion. You can have exemption for religious use, but we don't really define religion. But when asked if this is a religion or not, what the court will do is compare to established religions. And these are some of the elements that courts have, commented. Is there a founder, prophet, a teacher? Are there important writings? Are there gathering places? Are there keepers of knowledge? Ceremonies and rituals, structure or organization, holidays, diet, fasting? Is there a special kind of clothing? Are you engaged in propagation? That's interesting. Like, do you do proselytism? If so, you're a real religion. So this is a bit ironic because, it's more fit for the monotheistic big religions that have like a big foundational text and the idea of one single God. And it fits less the idea of shamanism. That is not exactly, trying to fit like a square into a hole, trying to make shamanism look exactly like a religion. So currently there are some groups trying to apply for exemptions. It's a very busy area. Chacruna is helping some of those groups and also helping underground communities to engage in best practices and organize themselves and protect themselves legally. This is another set of areas that we have dedicated ourselves a lot. So we have our sexual abuse guidelines, which, we try to cover a spectrum of things, including touching to like consensual sex between healer and participant up to rape. And we have been looking at, how abuse occurs across different contexts and cultures and different communities. I think this is one of the most solid projects that we have in Chacruna. It's really based on a long-term, field work experience and meetings with survivors and victims, consultations, both with people that suffered these problems, but also with indigenous and local folks, practitioners and facilitators, experts, academic experts, experts on sexual abuse, experts on legal issues, and on our personal experience assisting, unfortunately, women that have gone through this, and the psychedelic community at large. So these are some of the questions that we're asking in these guidelines. Why does sexual abuse occur in ayahuasca healing contexts? Is the globalization and commercialization of ayahuasca contributing to the occurrence of sexual harassment in ayahuasca communities? What are the issues with consensual sex between ayahuasca healer and participant? And then again, this is complicated because a lot of women might feel arousal or feel the need or the wish to have sex with the shaman and engage in relationships. And some shamans will frequently say, but she wanted it, pero ella quería. She was okay with it. So it's very hard to teach people about this sort of boundary involving, a differential of power and also patient-healer relationship. We have created these guidelines, and then we took them back to Iquitos. Like, we're going around like, this is our little Bible. Hi, do you want to see our little flyer? And we had a really good reception among retreat centers, government authorities, owners of businesses. We did also have a lot of backlash, both from a kind of toxic so-called social justice left, which I don't think it's the real social justice, but more like toxic aspects of this movement, and also some on the other side, let's say more radical, mainstream, white men that don't think that there is a problem. And why are you singling out ayahuasca? You're calling shamans rapists. You're calling indigenous people rapists, which of course we're not. So it's a very delicate topic, although I think a lot of the ayahuasca community recognizes it's a real problem. We also have created these legal resources that talk about your legal rights and where to go, and if you had problems, how you can talk to people about, and what are your rights, and what kinds of nonprofits can help you. So the guidelines are available in, I think, 7 languages. We have also these legal resources, I believe, about 5 countries, in both Spanish and English. We put a lot of love, a lot of sincerity into this work, and we encourage people to speak out, and we encourage people to look for us, although we don't have a directory of bad names as some people wanted us to do. It's not something we feel we can take on. The other set of issues that I wanted to talk, so dilemmas of ayahuasca globalization, for you to hang in there: cultural issues, tradition, orthodoxy, cultural appropriation. That's one whole set of things. Legal issues, another whole set of things. Sexual abuse, another set of things. Now I'm going to go to another set of things. This is based on a document that we created called Commodification of Ayahuasca. How can we do better? And again, we have published more than 150 papers in our site. Our site is entirely for free. We don't take any advertisement. We're really grassroots organization, and we're really proud that we're self-funded. We just count with the support of the community, and I think this is another very influential document that a lot of people have been reading, and it's aimed to. We're kind of doing the same across, the border. Like it doesn't work if you just sit there, criticize and lament the globalization of ayahuasca, or if you sit on top of your condo having your cappuccino and thinking, oh, how horrible everything is going on. We're about action in Chacruna, and we're about a real contribution. We're about concrete outcomes and outreach and community building, and building knowledge and sharing knowledge and creating a team spirit. So we are about harm reduction. The globalization of ayahuasca is happening, and there are several paradoxes and several challenges. But ayahuasca has also brought incredible healing to a great number of people on all the sides of the planet. So how can we do better? This is a set of questions that we proposed. It's 17. I picked 4 here. When attending a retreat center, are you paying attention? Do participants' well-being take precedence over financial motivations? That's a big one, and it's not a very complex one. It's also not saying that you can't have any kind of money exchange, because it's important to understand that having some kind of monetary exchange is not the same as commodification. Commodification is creating things as a commodity, is thinkifying, making things an object, and that's an entire new level. Our local or indigenous people paid fairly for their services and expertise. So, of course, it's kind of hard to know all of that. But we also just encourage people to talk to the facilitators, talk to the owners of the retreat center, talk to the shamans, create a culture of awareness and of interest in all of those things that go beyond just, the mantra of, oh, they're doing great work. This is helping so much people. So it's less about how this is bringing healing to a bunch of Westerners and helping them, cope with their childhood trauma and all their, complexes and neuroses and everything. But how is this being done on local terms? What is the consequences and implication for local folks? Where are the ayahuasca and ayahuasca-related plants sourced from? That's a really big thing. And as I said, of course, There are some people that will say, well, it's not a real problem because the Amazon is tearing apart hundreds and hundreds of hectares of forest per minute, per second, as we speak. So what do you care about a few people drinking ayahuasca? It's true that the levels of devastation of the Amazon are really terrible. However, this direct ayahuasca picking, effect is something we can have control of, and we can do better. So we just encourage people. The UDV has an interesting model in Brazil that if you want to be a church, you have to have your own garden, and you have to be locally sustainable, which I find fantastic. The UDV, however, has strong leadership of the UDV are currently supporting the government of Bolsonaro. So that's kind of funny because Bolsonaro is dedicated to the deforestation of the Amazon and to the genocide of indigenous people. So, that's a kind of large scale impact that government is having on Brazil. But anyway, again, it's another conversation. Are environmental and community concerns and efforts supported and respected? And a lot of retreat centers, they'll have a sign that say, we support a local school, we support a permaculture initiative, we support a local hospital. When you go to these retreat centers, you can try to get informed. Do they really support? Can you engage yourself directly in supporting as well? What do the local people say? And what can you verify from that? Because again, in a lot of cases, indigenous people have really become tokenized in the hand of this retreat owners. What is tokenized? What is tokenization? When you have a brown or black person, that you there to show diversity, but in fact that person is not on positions of power, is not really acknowledged. So if you watch ayahuasca sites, retreat centers, that's very clear. Some of them will have long bios and photos of the retreat organizers, but when it comes to the shaman, he doesn't have a name, or he just appears as a generic indigenous person, no ethnicity, no name, no location. So does the center does any effort in showing what is the local culture? That's the kind of thing that Chacruna is trying to promote. We're anthropologists. We come from the global south. We're from the non-English speaking world. We're trying to create these bridges. We're trying to talk, to encourage these more horizontal exchanges as ayahuasca global. We have also been giving voice to indigenous people and publishing a bunch of documents that are really relevant. This was a document put by UMIAC, that is they unite 6 different indigenous groups, but this document specifically got the signature of several indigenous organizations. What are the elders speaking? They speak a lot to young people themselves, to indigenous people themselves, critique some indigenous people that pretend to be taitas. That's also very common. There's a famous retreat center in Costa Rica that does that a lot. Bring indigenous people that are not shamans in their communities and represent them as taitas for foreigners. This is a kind of really strong statement. Let's say they are on the far end of the spectrum, because they're saying that to the limit, they don't think that no one outside the indigenous communities can cultivate, sell yagé or ayahuasca, or officiate ceremonies. They're not entirely closing the door, but what they're claiming is that non-indigenous users need to have the endorsement of indigenous communities. So this speaks to the need of establishing trusts and long-term relationships. And, this is a pretty cool document. I suggest you go online and read it. They're also talking about cultural appropriation, talking about mixing traditions and plant, talking about health issues, talking about the commercialization of ayahuasca, talking about non-indigenous people who feel that they are, sorry about that, got my WhatsApp on, feel that they are representing themselves as indigenous people. We also published and translated and published again all of this is, hard work from us. Like nobody's really funding us or, giving us money to do all of this. Hard work, a lot of voluntary work. And, we work, like often paying the translations ourselves. We collected all these documents. So after the second World Ayahuasca Conference, which was promoted by ICEERS in Rio Branco, I was part of the organizing committee and the scientific committee of that conference. The indigenous people concluded the conference with a really upset letter against the organizers, saying that they didn't feel very well treated, very well heard, very well placed into the conversation. And they decided to then move forward to creating indigenous-only conferences, which was really fascinating because that conference brought a lot of indigenous people together on a big scale. And then as a result, this more grassroots movement happened. And we've been translating all of these documents. Again, all is available on Chikrina's site. I'm doing a big summary here, just trying to get some stuff across for you guys. Some summary of what these documents are saying. They're defending the importance of gatherings for indigenous people only. It's a conversation with indigenous people, by indigenous people. Some outsiders were, allowed, but it was mainly indigenous people, and trying to promote self-regulation, and also creating a lot of discussions about who can access indigenous lands, and if indigenous people travel abroad, who gets to go on those trips and who represents the whole group. So the situation in Brazil is quite different than Peru or Colombia, where you have a lot of retreat centers. You have much more retreat centers in Peru, although a lot are owned by foreigners and some are partnerships between foreigners and locals. In Brazil, we don't have so much this model of retreat centers, although we do have a few retreats, but still not so much. What we do have is big indigenous festivals, and that's a whole different scene. I'll talk about it in a minute. Just going back to, a lot of what the indigenous people in Brazil are upset about is the fact that in Brazil, you recognize ritual and religious use of ayahuasca, so mainly the religions of the Santo Daime and the UDV, but a lot of apprehension of indigenous medicine has been done because they don't have like the paperwork for authorities, and so a lot of times they get their ayahuasca apprehended, and they have been really upset about that. Also upset that they were excluded from the process of recognition of ayahuasca as cultural heritage of Brazil. We just published a paper about that as well. It hasn't really been recognized. There has been a 10-year discussion on whether it will become recognized or not. So maybe it still will, but it's kind of taking a while. And, indigenous people were not invited originally until like 2003 or so, not too long ago. I remember I was living in Sao Paulo. I was part of that process. Indigenous people were not doing rituals in big cities. They were mainly on the Amazon and doing their own thing. And it's just from like the last 10 or 15 years that they started to circulate more widely in Brazil. So both go inside big cities in Brazil and for the first time abroad, the Yawanawa, Kaxinawa, different groups. And they're promoting a lot these festivals. This discussion of cultural appropriation has really not been strong in Brazil at all. It's much stronger in the US. And I think a lot of this influences indigenous people, both in Brazil and in Colombia, through the work on nonprofits and academics. Now it's kind of appearing in Brazil, but it's also, there's a different scene, as I say, because in Brazil, you don't have so much gringo-owned retreats, and you have these big festivals that are held by indigenous people. They organize that as a whole, although there are intermediaries and travel agencies and stuff. It's like the whole village doing this movement. So they also, indigenous people in Brazil have actively engaged in promotion of partnerships that, promote the festivals or other services and encourage the creation of projects with foreigners. I think what people from the global north, especially I live in the Bay Area, this discussion is so strong and so vibrant over here. A lot of people are really critical to this, but what they fail to understand is that indigenous people are entirely abandoned to their own faiths by the government. It's not societies that have a strong government, whether there's a decline and we have Trump on and the United States has so many paradoxes, is still a big privileged country compared to the so-called underdeveloped, or what was used to call the third world, or in development countries. So these groups are completely abandoned. It's not only abandoned, but like often there is a explicit strategy of extermination of indigenous people. For me, it's still puzzling with how obsessed Bolsonaro is with this topic, considering indigenous population is such a minority in terms of the global population. So there is, an active attempt to exterminate indigenous people, and indigenous people don't have the protection of the state, and so they have to go by and do the alliances they can, and they manage. So it can be rather ironic for people that are wealthy to just criticize those alliances, because they are a lot about strategic, survival. But as I said before, these exchanges are not always, harmonic, and there's also exchanges that are done through inequality and through different power differentials. So things get really complicated. And I want to just conclude with some more proactive suggestions, moving towards the presentation that I want to do. So I give a lot of lectures, and everybody wants to know, what can they do? How can I help? And that's a really hard question. I try to address this because I know you guys are going to ask anyway. I kind of separate it into researchers and people in general. I also hope that this webinar series is stimulating young people, millennials, and young PhDs and students to study these things, to offer that contribution, to do their homework, and do your collaboration for us to understand this really fascinating, complex, and dense subjects, these plant medicines and sacred plants that bring us so much passion and so much healing and so much inspiration. As a researcher, what can you do? Try to create research projects that are collaborative. So ask the community, how are they interested? How can your research help them? Here is a really dense topic. Take interspecies communication seriously. There are some researchers pointing out, the idea that ayahuasca or plant medicines or certain kinds of plants have a mother. They are spirit plants. They have agency. They have intentionality. They can teach you. They can punish you. They can comfort you. So to the limit, they are also humans like us. They are in the body of plants, but in fact, they have knowledge. They have wishes. They have idiosyncrasies. So if you consider the species, take that indigenous view seriously, it would be like taking ayahuasca as a species and relating to the wishes of that species as well. That's what some anthropologists have called interspecies communication. So beyond the interspecies communication, what would be an interspecies ethnography? A lot of discourse has been done about, adopting decolonial or post-colonial perspectives. This is related to the genocide is the elimination of indigenous people. Its equivalent on the level of knowledges or ideas would be the epistemicide, would be to disconsider, disregard, silence, and not contemplate different epistemologies. And so some people talk about the need to create epistemic justice. And again, for those who are related to indigenous people that want to create conferences, conversations, meetup, podcasts, salons, and all kinds of things, include indigenous people when you talk about indigenous people. That sounds obvious, no? But that's not always obvious. We have also just published by my friend Belinda Eriacho, she's Diné or Navajo, some guidelines on the inclusion of indigenous people in psychedelic conferences, support indigenous people, indigenous and Black academics. Try to diversify your bibliography references. Quote Black and indigenous and people of color authors, BIPOC authors. So try to just, find other sources. Create co-authorships with BIPOC authors. Promote South-South dialogues. We have been doing a lot of things like this, alliances between Brazil and Mexico, Brazil and Colombia, Colombia and Peru. Create this kind of South-South conversations. Promote other forms of knowledge that are also related to the body, to senses, and to territory, to land. Because you can't really separate these plants from territory, from identity, from land. And use traditional names of people when you're talking about indigenous people. Learn how is the word. For example, Diné is the self-nomination versus Navajo, or Wirarica or Huichol. Try to look for indigenous names, or, territory, same thing. Some indigenous people in Brazil and Latin America are trying to, reclaim or recall, for example, the continent of the Americas as Ayala. And now it's more to everybody. And what can I do? Or from the native's point of view, there's an or missing that. What can I do? Or think from the native point of view. So what can you do? You just, you want to do better. How can you try to be different? Talk to locals, ask questions, learn the language. Plurilingualism, language is fundamental. I really recommend, I used to sign my newsletter saying, learn Portuguese, it will make you happy. I speak 5 languages, I understand 6 languages. It's wonderful. It's super, super liberating. I highly recommend you study languages. It's a big start in cultural humility. Get informed about culture, read anthropology, read Chacruna site. And when you want to invite indigenous people, try to think from the indigenous perspective. What is there for indigenous people in this? I get so many, so many questions, so many businessmen, 3 times a week, I get a businessman, I want to invite an indigenous person for my advisory board or for this or that. Do you want to do this just to alleviate your white guilt and to, avoid being criticized for the lack of representation? Or do you really want to empower people of color? Because in Chacruna, we're trying to empower people of color. We're trying to celebrate people of color. We're trying to rewrite the narratives to include people of color in the mainstream narratives of psychedelic science. We're trying to empower people of color to become authors, speakers, and their own references. So what is there for the indigenous person in your initiative? Talk to her. What do you need? It's the philanthropist is here with his millions of dollars and his guilt, and he want to do better. So he goes to the Amazon and say, hi, I want to help you. Can you do this for me? And you're like, the indigenous person is there in the river and saying, huh? I need a boat. I need this. Do you want to help me? So these are some big words here and coming towards the end. Reciprocity, solidarity, horizontality, cultural humility, decolonization. This is also something that it's kind of a mantra for us in Chacruna. Create concrete actions. Actions are more worth than statements. I have been suffering a little bit, I turned 49 and I have I've been kind of idealizing this webinar, building a bridge between millennials and elders in the psychedelic community, because I just feel, that when you kind of feel like an ant, sometime you realize you're older, and this new generation has a lot of values that I admire, but I also struggle with aspects. A lot of millennials, they are super sharp in knowing everything and calling people out. That's great. And it's much better than my generation. And, yay for that. But that's not enough, really, because that can be confused with real action. So knowing all the political right things to say and do Facebook activism is not the same as creating uh, real actions. And when it comes to ayahuasca communities, I think we really need to establish and try to like empower local communities. So avoid a little bit this eternal circulation of shamans and try to create groups, that go always to the same place, that people go and gather together. In this regard, I do think that the model of the UDV and the Santo Daime is a good model to think of, like people sharing costs and sharing expenses to rent a place or the cost of ayahuasca, but in a more communal manner and less a workshop retreat kind of thing. Try to create things in real partnership with native people. And this means, slow down. It takes a lot of time. It involves listening a lot. It involves building trust. It involves moving slowly. And sometimes that's hard. And we feel the urgency to do something, and we're called, and the sense of justice is there, and we just want to do it. But sometimes not doing something is also powerful. So about, creating these relationships, relating to people that you create a long-term relationship. And then, following our commodification document, be mindful of which ayahuasca retreat you select, because not all are the same. And I also personally am a fan of supporting the plantation of ayahuasca. And I also, suggest to people to support grassroots nonprofits that work with indigenous people, land, environment, and plant medicines. So, of course, these big nonprofits like, Rainforest Alliance or Amazon March, they do wonderful work. But I suggest to people always try to go directly to native people and support nonprofit organizations. We're currently working on a resource like that in Chacruna. So a lot of people want to be reciprocal and give back, but they don't know how. So I want to invite all of you that have this calling, join our movement, support Chacruna. That's our website, chacruna.net. I really recommend you follow us. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I am also on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. I am as Labate Bia on Twitter and Instagram, and on LinkedIn I am Bia Labate. We just created, that's my email over there. It's B from my name and Labate, and then bialabate.net. And I want to thank, all the Chacruna team, especially Josh, who's been working a lot these days with me, and Horacio, and our wonderful designers. A lot of our team is based in Mexico and Brazil. We're a global network. We have around 15 team members in different capacities. The great majority is volunteers. We're just creating a membership program. After three and a half years of entire voluntary work and, not feeling kind of really, really challenged by the business side of things, because I'm an anthropologist, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I have a PhD. I didn't want to do spreadsheets and plans and budgets, and I just tried to resist and rebel the most I could. But finally, I kind of got exhausted and understood that if we're not sustainable, this is not going to work. And more of all, we can work for free and do a lot, but we really need money to be able to scale things to the level of things that we want to do. So I really want to encourage you to either donate to Chacruna, you can see in our website, or to become a member. We're creating also webinar members only, for members only, and we also started a channel in Discord, which is a kind of Slack app. And we're really counting on, people that feel inspired by ayahuasca. We also do a lot of conservation work. We have published a few materials with peyote. We have done a bunch of things about race and inclusion and diversity, and launched a few really influential documents. We have also held this conference, Queer and Psychedelics, and have been doing work to support queer people and, promote sensitivity in this area. We also held a big conference called Women and Psychedelics, and another one, Sacred Plants in the Americas. We have all our conferences are free in our website. We have 6 conferences entirely for free in our website. All our articles are entirely for free as well, the Chacruna Chronicles. And then we have the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants, where I said we're documenting cases, we're supporting people that have legal challenges. Recently, there has been a really bad wave of apprehension of medicines in the United States, more than 70 that we have followed, and we have networks that keep privacy and confidentiality, and we have been supporting leadership and also helping spread, as I said, best practices and support. So I want to thank MAPS. I want to thank everybody that has the patience to be in a webinar like this, to talk about dense things like this. And I thank my team and everybody, a big hug, and I am concluded. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bia. So we have a whole bunch of questions here that are ready for you. And we just, before we get into them, I just wanted to say on behalf of MAPS, thank you for being here with us today. We really appreciate your expertise and your experience in this. And also for the work that you're doing in the world. We can see from your presentation, there's a multitude of dilemmas, and you're doing some great work in bringing a culture of awareness towards them. So thank you for that. So are you ready to take a few questions here?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. So the first one is from Antonio. He asks, how is ayahuasca regulated in Brazil? And is the Bolsonaro government prosecuting ayahuasca practitioners? I know you had touched on this a little bit.
So it's still the same regulation that we had before. So we have the government has recognized the right to ritual and religious use of ayahuasca, and there's not exactly a definition of religion, so in that sense it's quite open. But what is permitted is ritual and religious. It's not permitted sales or commercialization, just covering the costs. And also the therapeutic use is not really permitted. And so this hasn't changed under Bolsonaro, although he has extinguished a few of the departments that discuss these issues in Brazil. And, one of his sons has done a aggressive comment about this hallucinogenic tea. And here and there he has, people are concerned. There's also 2 new attempts to regulate ayahuasca, and people are extremely because what we have is a kind of regulation that is a resolution. It doesn't have the force of a law, but it kind of works as a law. So some people want to move this for a law, and other thinks that it's best to have this kind of more loose environment, or that the law would just create more stringent conditions. So there has been 2 attempts to regulate more ayahuasca, but they haven't really moved forward. So in sum, the situation hasn't changed, but everybody's a little bit stressed and concerned. And what created a lot of concern was also to see some of the really important UDV leadership supporting Bolsonaro. And I think the more sad thing that happened was that the ayahuasca community in Brazil really had a fight. It's a bit like people, when you have this kind of fascist, authoritarian, right-wing governments, like is the case with Trump, creates a lot of polarity, and it creates, families are broken, Christmas parties and holidays, family holidays happen falling out. This happened in Brazil a lot. I think there's some Brazilian, from what I see in this thread, maybe they can put their comments on the chat. After all, I am a gringa myself, now living in the United States, but I do try to follow. I don't know, brasileiros that are there, what do you think? Fora Bolsonaro, that one is saying, I agree, out Bolsonaro. So I've seen that created a lot of fights in the ayahuasca field, because some people explicitly, like Acre, Rio Branco, I think voted almost 70%, and that's for Bolsonaro. That's the capital of the, let's say it would be the Iquitos area of Brazil, where all the religions are. But then again, that's more, has local reasons, because that state had like a previous administration from the opposite party, and so it was a reaction to that. It's a bit confusing, yeah.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to move on to the next question, which has to do with the personality of ayahuasca. And this one's from Michael. He says, in your opinion, what is the personality of ayahuasca like, and how is it unique from the personality of other psychedelic substances, like mushrooms, perhaps?
Michael, that's a hard one. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. I think we need somebody more spiritually elevated than me. I have a friend, Anthony Hammond, that he liked to talk about species in terms of like where they come from, their geography. So he would contrast, like ayahuasca comes from the forest and it's humid and it can be like, dense and like can be really severe and have like insects and snakes and creatures, and versus peyote is more from the desert, more solar and open air and strength and big walks, so he would also say that ayahuasca, peyote was kind of flirting, and versus ayahuasca was like kind of nailing you, like more subtle peyote than ayahuasca. But also peyote it can take 10, 12, 14 hours, and ayahuasca will take maybe 4 or 6 a dose. So it depends. One can be more intense in one sense, but less intense in another sense. And all these plants can be incredibly, harsh, but they can be incredibly beautiful. And so it's hard to say the personality per se, because it's also kind of relational thing. It depends on you, and it depends on your friendship with that and that substance and where you're at. And I personally, I get pretty beaten off by ayahuasca, but I kind of like it because I think it's good for me. As you guys know, I have a big mouth, as some people already said in the chat, and I take a lot of activism, and I'm really in the front lines of all of this, like politics and all the challenges. So I purge a lot on ayahuasca, and I also like to take big doses compared to other people. I kind of drink a lot because I feel that I'm very critical and very mental. And you're welcome for having my big mouth. And so I feel I need big doses and strong. So it depends. There are some people that are more, to them. I was in a retreat, my last retreat, with 2 women that were like yoga teachers and nutritionists, and they were like it wasn't very strong for them. And I don't know, for me it was hell. So it depends. I don't know. The personality is a hard thing. I think there is personality to it, but there's also your story, and it's also for you to find out that. And it also varies throughout your life. I have had a cycle. I've been drinking ayahuasca for 23 years. When I was younger, I was much more fierce, and now I'm less. There's also that. People say that Mestre Neo said he liked to give people, he would enjoy giving ayahuasca to people that are over 40 because, they're kind of more mature, versus other people really brag about the fact that they're like, when they are in the belly of their mama, they were drinking ayahuasca already. So they've been always ayahuasca-ized on their whole life. So there's so many things. It's a real path. It's endless. It's infinite. It's a journey. And, there's always a new path, a new turn, a new finding, a new, discovery, a new enigma, a new challenge. And I am deeply grateful for ayahuasca. It's taught me so many things, helped me travel the world, helped me put me in very nice soft pillows in nice hotels giving lecture about ayahuasca, helped me be here now. I own a lot to ayahuasca, and it really just really works on like making us better people. And it's hard to explain for people that don't know that. And but it's really about being human. It's about feeling the connection to everything, to the invisible world, to the other worlds, to your ancestors, to the invisible beings, to the spirits, to what really matters. Like, it really puts everything in perspective. It realigns your perspective about everything, and tell you truths right to your face, and that are just there. At the same time, is something completely different and exotic and alien, but it's also incredibly familiar and like coming back home where you should have never left. So there is this paradox of this authority that is so external, but that in fact, it's there all the time. Anyway, I can go on and on forever about what is ayahuasca. I prefer to more sociological.
I love your answer there. And like you said, it's a journey, and people in a way kind of have to realize that for themselves, right?
Yeah.
We have a question from Gustavo. He is a fellow Brazilian anthropologist. He says, as a fellow Brazilian anthropologist, it is with great apprehension that I see the escalation of conservatism in Brazil, as well as in other parts of the world. Do you see that as an issue affecting the access to psychedelics like ayahuasca, especially among the communities who have been using them for decades and sometimes for centuries?
Hi, Gustavo. Oi, Gustavo. I think I talked a little bit about that in my previous question. Yeah, I think so. I think there's real challenges, but now with COVID, it's really not about ayahuasca. It's about whether people are going to survive or not, because Bolsonaro has been boycotting, between Brazil and the US. I find myself in the worst coronavirus places in the world. The two most I don't want to curse, like the two most problematic governments that exist in terms of like not recognizing the challenges of coronavirus, calling coronavirus a little flu and calling people hysterical and diminishing. And, Bolsonaro imitates a lot Trump, so he will say things like, oh, chloroquine is the solution. And I think this is not really just about the access to ayahuasca anymore. This is whether indigenous people will survive. There has been a lot of real losses. We also have published in Chacruna a document about supporting grassroots indigenous efforts and efforts of nonprofits to support coronavirus efforts for indigenous people. I think that's the priority right now.
Absolutely. And I think we've had a few links that have come across Crowdcast and a few other webinars supporting some communities there as well. So if anyone has any of those they want to share, feel free to put them in the chat. The next question here comes from Jordan, and he says, can any parallels be drawn between Amazonian stories of snakes giving humans ayahuasca and Abrahamic stories of the serpent in Eden with the tree of knowledge? If so, how do you think these parallels came to be?
I don't know that. I'm sorry. I don't have an answer for that.
No problem. We'll go on to the next one here from Antonio.
I mean, just, Jeremy Narby, I can recommend Jeremy Narby's book. He has talked a lot, The Cosmic Serpent, about, he claims that these ayahuasca visions have to do with the DNA. So, he makes a whole parallel between the snake and the format of the DNA and like the patterns of the songs. But it's kind of trippy. I mean, it's a book that is philosophical and speculative. There's not like any evidence that that's what is at stake. But yeah, there's some kind of discussions. It's called The Cosmic Serpent. So I think maybe you'll find some kind of reflections along those lines, trying to create, see patterns of snakes and double X's through different cultures and ayahuasca and myths and things like that. I kind of need to read the question because it's sometimes I don't understand the English. So I'll follow with you, but you read. So which one are you going to take now?
We're going to go to Antonio. With the loss of cultural diversity and traditions happening due to globalization, are there any organizations working on documenting and preserving the recipes, traditions, and folklore of the different indigenous communities that use ayahuasca?
I don't think there's a lot. I mean, there's some, indigenous people themselves doing their own work of preservation, and there's initiatives. There's a big Maku, for example, encyclopedia that's over 500 entries of documentation of different plant medicines. The Kaxinawa have done the Book of Healing, o Livro da Cura, which was also a partnership with some researchers trying to document it. There's some projects called Vídeo nas Aldeias, video in the villages that are trying to create documentation. I don't know of one major organization that I can tell you go for this, but yeah, there's for sure there is different initiatives by different groups, and now what exists is also a group in Brazil that has a project to study ayahuasca. I'm actually co-author of one of their papers. It's a group in University of Brasilia, and they're collecting different vines from different communities, because you see, this is very interesting. You don't have, like, if you go to an indigenous group, you say, how many ayahuasca vines you have? You say 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 18. Which one is this one? Oh, this is the red parrot. And then you bring the botanist there, and he can't see any difference between the red parrot and the macaw one. But all the people in the group can recognize that. And then you ask them, but what is that? Oh, this was planted by the great-grandfather, da, da, da. Like indigenous, pharmacopoeia and classifications are very deep and that don't necessarily match scientific descriptions. So this is something that is really interesting. There is this whole boom of ayahuasca. It's so everybody, all the celebrities, everybody, every 5 seconds a new celebrity doing a new ayahuasca thing. But what do we actually know about the plant itself? Like, you go to all these ayahuasca conferences, there's hardly any botanist or anybody presenting anything about the botanical, the conservation aspects. We're so distracted with our obsession with ayahuasca that we forget to study the very vine and the leaf. That's also why we like to call it chacruna. So yeah, there's this research in Brazil that is happening is very cool, and they can also do all kinds of things. Like there has been scientific research before, but more could be done.
Absolutely. This question here, we'll have time for a couple more questions. This one's from Pedro. What do indigenous people think about the ayahuasca used by Christian religions and about the use in big urban cities without a shaman?
Well, that's very hard to say, because you have dozens and dozens of different users of ayahuasca, so different indigenous people. You have also a spectrum. You have the ones that are more orthodox, you have the ones that are more engaged with new age circles and that are themselves promoting this activities or promoting rituals, and as I said, the big festivals. You have also indigenous people traveling abroad, engaging in giving ayahuasca. I think it's, people I like a lot to say cultural appropriation and violation, but I think it's more complicated and more complex, because we also know for a fact, for example, some Kaxinawa people, they had kind of abandoned shamanism and they joined Santo Daime religion, and some of them also went to other more urban, new age manifestations. I know those people personally, Sia Kaxinawa and Leopardo Yawabane, he's part of our advisory board. And by joining the Santo Daime, they kind of start to, regain interest in their own traditions. And this, like the Kaxinawas, they were pretty beaten up until the 70s, living kind of abandoned. And there's a big process of pride and of reestablishing their ethnic identity and their political power. And ayahuasca has played a big role in that, and sometimes through the dialogues with non-indigenous, with nonprofits, with anthropologists, with hippies, with people from the left, with artists, with gay people, urban people. And so I don't think, I think they get really mad when they get their ayahuasca prevented. And that's really not fair. But in general, I don't say that, I don't think that you can say that they are against. Although, we have also seen the UMIAC document in Colombia that was signed by several organizations, where they're kind of almost saying, no non-indigenous use is no valid. But there's also mestizo users in Colombia. And also the same people that signed this document, they were engaged in certain collaborations with certain foreigners, and collaborations that went bad and they became sour. So there is room for a lot of things. I think the best way to look at it is through the personal relationships that people have, if they have the blessings of a certain group. Of course, there's also groups that are considered less legitimate than others. In some never-ending discussion.
We'll take one more question here, if that's okay. And I'm going to scroll down to one from Bonnie. How does Chacruna approach the question, what do the plants want? What's in it for them?
Wow, you guys have some difficult questions here. I just want to see what are the other questions from Jordan.
There's two more from Jordan there, but I thought I'd give someone else a chance there. Sorry, Jordan.
Well, about whether ayahuasca is masculine or not, it depends. In different traditions, it's men or women. In Daime, it's the Daime, masculine or Daime, and ayahuasca, the vine is considered masculine and the leaf feminine, but the totality is masculine. So we also have published a paper in Chacruna about the feminization of ayahuasca. I don't really know a lot about native plants on Canada. So what do the plants want, Bonnie? You really got me. I don't know. I was in this retreat, and I like to tell a lot of stories, but I try to behave myself because sometimes they don't like too many jokes here. It's a bit stressed. But I was in this retreat in Costa Rica, and then this famous super celebrity, he wakes up and he's with this super tight shorts and his muscles, and he's showing all his muscles, and he's very muscular, and then he's looking at the horizons like this, and a cameraman is filming him, no? And he turns, this is what ayahuasca told me. And and this is a big TV show. I'm okay, dude, do you have the press pass of ayahuasca? Just, you go drink ayahuasca for the first time in your life, bring a filmmaker, exhibit your muscles and look into the horizons and claim, this is the message ayahuasca has to the world. I think that is incredibly naive and irritating, frankly. Who is he to tell the world who is ayahuasca saying? And we want to make a t-shirt saying, ayahuasca told me, and sell it in Chacruna, because ayahuasca, people say a lot of things. Ayahuasca told me this, therefore, all right, ayahuasca tell a lot of things to a lot of people. So I don't want to discredit people that receive messages, but also we have to be mindful, We also have another tale of this guy that he was in the ayahuasca ceremony, and then it's night. Okay, this is a Canadian guy, so I'm going to throw it in for you Canadians. It's at night, and everybody's quiet, and then he is in the dark, and he's I'm the one! And then everybody's quiet, nobody says, some time passes, and then he passes sometime. I'm not the one. I'm not the one. It's he received he was the one, and then he received he was not the one. So, people receive different things. However, I'll take your question seriously as well. And I think that what ayahuasca wants is to be protected and to be respected and to be honored. So that's what we're trying to do in Chacruna, protected from malpractice, protected from opportunism, protected from charlatanism, protected from, from people that are not entitled to use it and to give it out. And we're also trying to, work on conservation, work on harm reduction. And to me, it's not only about being, it's not just being like whether we're doing harm reduction or things to avoid the problems of globalization, but we're also just celebrating the beauty of these traditions, the culture, because not everything has to have an utility immediately as well. You know, I'm an anthropologist. I didn't want to go study something like, oh, if I study this, then that. No, I'm interested in culture. So we have a big problem in being funded. I want to again encourage you guys to, to donate or become members, because it's very hard to fund work. I had this issue with a philanthropist recently, and he's like, but what do you do? And how do you measure the impact? And how can you see if there was change? And I asked him, how much does an idea is worth? Like, how can you measure the value of an idea? So I think ayahuasca traditions are incredibly beautiful and deep and meaningful, and studying, documenting, writing, celebrating, giving visibility to that, understanding that, creating these bridges between these traditional cultures and us and our society, and making myths translatable to English, and understanding their history. And it's just incredibly beautiful, and it's as endless as the path of ayahuasca, because ayahuasca only exists as a cultural manifestation. It doesn't exist outside land. It doesn't exist outside culture. People might say, oh, this is universal. Yeah, right. But, it's universal, but it didn't appear in the middle of Asia somewhere. It appeared in the Amazon with indigenous people. So honoring and understanding those cultures, and, for me, documenting, registering, researching, it's food for the soul, but also for our thoughts. It also helps us think better and learn. So Chikrin is about learning and having fun. And, again, if you want to have access to our books, I can share. Some of them are quite expensive and inaccessible. If you want to use it for scientific use only, for personal use and not commercial use, you can write to me and I can help you get. I'm putting my email there, and follow us in Instagram, and that's my Instagram and Twitter handle. We also have a webinar tomorrow in Chacruna. I also invite you all of that. We're doing a lot of webinars almost weekly. We're not as organized as MAPS Canada. We don't have a whole series. We go by weeks, but I'm also posting it there. So if you guys are interested in attending, I hope you don't mind my little promo, Shannon.
No, we definitely don't mind at all. And if there's anything we can do to, help share those links and support you, we definitely will, because we appreciate everything that you're doing, being here and sharing this knowledge and everything that you're doing in the world as well. We're so honored to have you here today. So I just wanted to again say thank you for that. And, if there's anything else that you wanted to say in the last few minutes we have here, feel free to do so as well.
No, just want to tell everybody to stay safe and respect quarantine. And I send my love, and I think we're going to get through this. I'm hoping we're going to see the light somewhere. And then, especially for the young children born during these times, it's a whole different world, but we got to keep on the hope and the faith and the blessings of our, plant medicines to guide us, to inspire us, and, keep our dreams, keep our faith, keep strong, keep united, keep healthy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Bia. And we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for being here.
All right. Bye-bye.
So in closing, I'd like to take this time to thank everyone who's helped out so far with this webinar series to make it possible. A huge special thank you to our guest, Bia Labate. Also, thank you to the MAPS Canada volunteers who are assisting with this event. And thank you to all of our speakers, past, present, and future. We appreciate you and the amazing work that you're doing. Also, thank you to our amazing sponsors for providing perks for the webinar. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for being here to support this series, these speakers, and this important research. So our next episode is actually going to be tomorrow, with Kaluti, and our last episode will be next Tuesday, August 25th with Wade Davis. And make sure and submit your questions in advance. Our full lineup can also be viewed on the webpage at mapscanada.org/webinar. So as mentioned, we are going to draw for 2 free tickets to the next webinar series. And if Michael is handy there, I will bring you on to do the draw. Michael, are you around? I'm around. All right, can we pop you on screen? And ready to draw. Perfect. And the winner is... the suspense. Who is it? Who is it?
Already here, so we've got a bunch of names here. And the winner is going to be Andrew Ross.
Andrew, congratulations. You have 2 free tickets to season 2. So we will be in contact with you through email. And thanks so much, Michael. Michael's doing a lot of work behind the scenes, so it's nice to see him on the camera there as well. So just a reminder, we are only $12,000 away from our goal of $250,000 for a fundraiser campaign. If you'd like to help us on this final leg, please see the link in the chat at the bottom of the screen. That'll appear soon. And also thank you everyone for your submissions and testimonials. We really appreciate them. So as you've noticed, we've been talking about a season 2 of Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance. We almost have all of the speakers confirmed from this for this, and we're very excited to launch it to you, but not just yet. So we should have this ready for ticket sales within the next couple of weeks, and we'll make sure and let you know when it is available. So thank you again for attending. Thanks again to Dr. Bia Labate for being our special guest today. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next episode. Bye for now.